Hello, web designers. Here we are again in Chapter 8. Now we are on Pacific Trails, Chapter 8, Task 3 on page 302. This is where we're going to configure a medium layout display for our site. This is also going to be this is like our tablet, okay? Or if somebody zooms in a little bit from a large display. We're going to use both a Flexbox for the navigation, and then we're going to use a grid to modify the activities in your page. So this is going to be fun. Lots of information. That's why we did this in 3 videos. Let's go.
Here I have shown this is the difference between Flexbox and CSS Grid. So Flexbox, which is what we started to do, really last week all we did is like bust apart the restrictions, right? That were restricting they were restricting how the page was laid out, right? Like it was forcing it into a certain size and all of that good stuff. And if we look on page 300 in our textbook, we see that basically we had the large display and we forced that large display based on width properties in CSS and height properties and all of that good stuff. And it's the width properties that really screw with responsive design. So we don't really do that. Also, we don't use float in responsive design. So grid is what we're going to use most when we are designing for a responsive design in CSS. So this is amazing. This like page here, I would really use it to understand grid. And it's got this cool poster. Like, yeah, I want a poster that I can print of grid because it's kind of confusing. And so like all of a sudden you're just like, okay, I have no idea what's going on. I'm just gonna like type the numbers that the book is telling me, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I see what's happening here. So Moana, oh my gosh, I get triggered so bad with like Disney movies and weird things that my kids are into. Anyways, the first thing we have to do is we have to configure a medium layout, and this is from task 3 in our book. I went all the way down to the bottom. I need to move my little picture guy, okay, over here. I went all the way to the bottom of our CSS file, and I put a little comment that everything above is standard and mobile first design, right? And then below here now, we're going to start our medium design. So I'm going to say medium or tablet layout. Okay, then from there, all right, so I want to open up in a browser. I want you guys to be comfortable with using your browser console, especially because in JavaScript, you're going to use it a ton. So if I right click on the page somewhere, I can inspect. I'm using Google Chrome. Normally I use Firefox, but I actually like the console in Google Chrome better. So that's what I'm using. And this is, I call this the console, but really it's all the tools. It's the web developer tools. The console is what we use to run JavaScript in. So one of the wonderful things, what I really like about this, I want to show you what you can do. One of my feedback, I think one of my major feedbacks for you guys completing assignments in these case studies is that I feel like y'all aren't looking, some of you aren't looking at what it actually, like what your page looks like when you open it in a browser, and then you're not comparing it to what the book looks like, you know, because I know it's actually incredibly small, so that could be a problem, but there's just like some spacing issues sometimes, or like the font is totally different and things like that. So I want you guys to become familiar with, okay, finding out those like visual differences. And if you see a visual difference, you as a designer now, what we want to be able to do is look at something and be like, okay, what is that? You know, and we should be able to figure out what the element is. So then we know, oh, I know a CSS thing that will help fix whatever that visual issue is. And one tool that we have that's wonderful for helping us is our web developer tools. And check this out. So, go away. Okay, so I have all my elements here, right? So that's like my HTML. As I go down, it's highlighting what everything is, right? I have the head. Well, it doesn't see the head. But then I have body, and then I have my divider, and then I have my header, right? And it just keeps going. So if I find something funky on my page, or maybe I found a website that I absolutely adore and I want to find out how the heck did they do that, then I can open up my inspect panel and I can start going through to find out, okay, where did they get that? You know, how did they do that? And I just start like digging way deep and I can find out. And then if it's like a class, I can also find out if they're like using Bootstrap or something like that based on some of the classes. And I'm like, oh, that's how they do that. And then I can see, like, once I hit a particular element here, I can raise up go here to styles. And then I can actually see what styles are affecting this particular thing, right? So I love the styles. So now we have so many things. We have so many ways that we can test our page, right? Including, of course, our text editor. So really and then there's one more. One more is the CSS validation. I've been telling you guys to do this, right? And there's a reason, because if I would have done this last week, I would have seen what my problem was. Okay, so watch what happens. Okay, I'm going to do task 3 right now because that's what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, so I'm going to do a media query. So a media query is at media, open parentheses, and then I put min width or max width, or there's a bunch of different properties I can put. You can look in the book to find out all the different properties. And then I have 600, okay, or greater. So min width 600 pixels. Okay, now I open my curly braces. And now basically what I'm saying is that only at 600 pixels and above, I'm going to change something. And I'm just going to do one thing. Styles for the nav UL selector. So here's the thing with the selectors. So this is where we get into, like, we don't have to do everything from the top because this is like our standard, the mobile design. So everything below that, though, is going to be adjusting whatever was up top or adding to it or taking away from it, because that's the next thing. You know, it's a cascading style sheet. So what's down at the bottom is done first, or like rules, right? Usually. Sometimes you have to force it by putting important, and we'll learn about that. So from here, though, if I do this, then I'm going to configure a flex container for a row that does not wrap. So I have to set the display first notice there's all these different ones. I've really only used Flex Grid, inline block. So I'd be interested to find out about inline flex and inline grid and what those do. Okay, so display flex and then flex direction. Whoops. So that tells me, do I want to do it across the column, or do I want to do it, vertically, or do I want to do it across a row horizontally? So in our case, it's telling us row. That does not wrap. So here's this wrap thing. Space around flex. Oh, come on. Flex wrap. Okay, I have to try to remind myself. Flex wrap. No wrap. Okay. And then what else? Oh, it's the space between. What's that original property? Space between. There it is. Justified content property. Okay, so justify. So remember, justify in editing is about the way, like, it's kind of like alignment. So justify content and a space between. So we're making a space between the flex boxes. Finally. Okay, that's it for now. I'm just gonna pause here because let's see. This should change something. No, I'm gonna do one more. Notice, guys, that I am in between. I'm using my curly braces. It's kind of like a function within a function. So when you get into JavaScript, this is very similar to the way that JavaScript is written. So it's kind of cool because when you get in there, you'll be like, oh, JavaScript is a lot like CSS, which is interesting because JavaScript is, we often use CSS, right, to call, like to query elements inside our HTML in order to make the JavaScript or change the behavior of our site. So that's kind of cool. Oh, let's see. So we have this. Okay, so what I'm saying is that you have properties. You have this new selector that's just in that media. So you have to enclose it within the media's curly braces. So now I'm also going to do a nav list. And I'm going to say border bottom none. So because I have it at the bottom and it has to do with just one thing, it's just going to, just like we saw in the browser, the way that, you know, one of those styles was crossed out, it's because it's going to be like the original one up in like our regular mobile first design will be crossed out, and then this will supersede it because of its location. And then, okay, we're going to code I'm just going to go through all of this real quick. Knock out this CSS for section. So remember we like got rid of the sections. Now we're putting them back in. Because we're going to use sections, but we're going to code the sections so that they act a certain way in Flexbox. And we're going to set padding to EM. Okay, section, and then we're going to save it. So check this out. You know how it says save and test? Okay. Well, I never do that. I never test it with you guys. But I want to show you. Remember, I was so frustrated last week. Notice I could be very mad right now because everything that I just did absolutely nothing to my HTML page. WTF. And instead of racking my poor brain, like I did last week with what is wrong, I am going to copy it and I'm going to paste it inside the validator by direct input. And then I'm going to check it. We found an error. Hallelujah. It found the error for me, right? So it found it. It says parse error. So parse error is a lot like syntax error when we get into JavaScript. It's called parse. So it actually tells me exactly what's happening. It's like at 2:11. Okay, 2:11, which is fantastic. It knows where it is. Let's see. Let's make these next to each other. Okay, so at 2:11, I have a parse error and it tells me 600 pixels. And then it's like blah, 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 blah. So it doesn't tell me what a parse error is, but notice it has this. What this is going to make me do is it's going to make me question my semicolon. Okay. I need to recognize that I have to question the semicolon and the parentheses. Okay, so I'm going to look up, because I don't need my stinking book, at media query syntax. Let's just do media query syntax. Okay, so if I look at this, and we love W3 schools because it's super simple. Mozilla developer website is the bomb, but it is a little higher level, it's a little higher level language. W3 schools, super simple. So let's figure out, where's it at? Here it is. Okay, what is different? Keeping in mind that it told me that had a parse error, and it had to do with the semicolon. See that? There shouldn't be a semicolon, so it's a syntax error. Okay, and that's what JavaScript says syntax error, and that's so much better than parse. I don't even know what parse means, but syntax is a language. Okay, so it's a language error. I've done something weird in my code that doesn't make sense. So if I get rid of it, and it sucks because Adam doesn't know. Normally Adam gives us some clues if we're doing something wrong. It like changes colors and stuff like that. Adam didn't know what was going on. So that's fine. He's as good as we get. He's still just a machine with language. Okay. So now let's see what you have to save it first. Okay. There we go. Hallelujah. Friggin' Luya, right? So now it pops into place. So whoop, 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 whoop. And that place where it changes is called the breakpoint. Okay. So you have this breakpoint, boom, breakpoint from a media query. All right. So nothing too much changed. The thing that we're going to have to do now is this section. We have to change section again because I think we changed it back, and I don't know, we have to check it out. Right now, here's my sections, but they have been altered, so they're not in column format anymore. Okay, so this is what they look like. Right now, the only thing that we've done is given it a 2EM padding. You can tell because it isn't aligned with the H2 element. What do we have to do? So it tells us we need to revert back. No, don't revert back. That's a horrible idea. So what we want to do is configure the main element as a grid. Okay, so let's see. We are going to change this to a grid. And this is where the Flexbox isn't really useful because we have 3 separate elements, right? We've got these 3 separate elements and we want them to behave a certain way in the medium, at the medium. So we are only going to, we're going to add a class. This is on page 303 now. And I am on C1 and 2. So we're going to modify the HTML. We're going to use a content class to indicate to the browser when to configure the main element area for a 3-column content page. So we're going to edit both of them, both the yurts and the activities. All right, let's do it. So float is not responsive. So we floated before, not responsive, don't do it. Because it winds up looking super weird. If it's floating to 33%, because that's what it was, 33%. Can you imagine, if it's floating to 33% and you're on this tiny screen, then it's going to be these weird little columns, if it's ticking up. Okay, so let's do a grid. So we're going to put a content class in our main. Okay, but we're just going to add this. Honestly, it doesn't matter if we add it to every single HTML page or not. But in our case, we're just going to add it to the main. I'm going to give it a class content. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my yurts page. My main is going to have a class of content. And so basically what we're going to be doing is it's not going to do anything yet because we don't have it coded in our CSS. But what we're going to be doing is forcing this to have a nice responsive. It's going to have 3 columns here on medium, and it's not going to be using floats. So in our CSS, we don't have to do this with our media query, do we? But I guess we should. Let's see. Okay, I guess it doesn't say that we have to do it. I don't know. Let's just do it outside, actually. Let's do it outside of our media just in case. It's very nice. It's telling us exactly the code that we have to use. Let's walk through it. So first, we're changing our display. Since this is grid now, it's not Flexbox, it's grid. Okay, and then we're changing we're making grid template rows. This used to be a language that you would have to link to, but with HTML5 it became a part of our CSS3. It became a part of the actual language for everything. Just FYI. Auto, and then grid template. Columns, 1 FR. FR is another, oh, okay. Right now, by me putting in 3 of these 1 FRs, it's telling me that I want 3 columns.
My template rows actually change automatically based on the size of the other elements. The 1FR, 1FR, 1FR says that each of these columns needs to be the same width and take up each one 1/3 of the usable space. So for every element within this main grid, I have to define where the row starts and ends and where the column starts and ends. And right now we've got this auto rows. So we are imagining, okay, there's only 2 rows technically. So if we imagined a line right underneath the image and then a line right underneath our H2, well, that's 1, 2. So it's starting at the first row, ending at the second row, but it's actually a line, which is interesting. And that matters because of the next one, which is grid column. Notice up in content main, we defined grid template columns 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. So that's only 3 columns. But our grid column for H2 is actually 1, starting at 1 and ending at 5. Well, where are these extra 2 columns, you may ask yourself, or technically extra 1 column? And this is where we start to understand that it's kind of weird. We're doing this a little backwards because we're designing for the medium display, but the medium display is actually going to affect our large display. So we have to do inside like first, but it's this grid column for H2 is actually based on what's going to happen in the large display. Tricky. So I think that's why they just told us this is what we have to do because of that trippy little thing. So here's an image of that. And as you can see, I've broken it up. I'm using the large display. And if we look at the large display and we look at the columns in that large display, we can see, oh, okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows or 5 lines defining those columns. So we're saying that we actually want it to start all the way at 1 and go all the way to 5. Then to keep it weird, it's actually that combination of the 2, because in the large display, we're going to make a grid column in the wrapper, and it's going to have 5 columns, or it's going to have 4 columns, 5 lines. So it's like we're taking that wrapper, but we're using the starting point in the main grid. So it's super weird. So we're like combining the 2 grids before we've even created the grid and the wrapper. So a little strange. I probably would want to do it large first, then medium. But this is the way it is in the book. So we'll just keep going from here. Okay, so first we're going to define the grid row. Now, remember, this is a starting line and an ending line. So the starting line is 2 because it's after the H2 element. And then the ending line is 3 because it's only taking up one row. So we put 2/3 semicolon. Let's do grid column now. Now this can just be auto because we've already defined it in our grid template columns. So that is what's going to determine what those 3 columns, the size of those 3 columns. Now we'll just finish this off. There is this special ID that apparently we will use in chapter 9. We're going to put auto for grid row, and then grid column is going to start at 1, end at 5, so that's going to span just like the H2. Now I'm narrating this after I've already done this, so I see the error staring right in my face. Okay, we'll do the same for the footer. Again, it's just like what H2 is doing. Even though we don't have 5 lines for our column yet. Now, luckily, when I highlight this, because I want to copy and paste it into the footer, since they're the same, I notice that my forward slash isn't there. Hallelujah. Now, if I would have ran this through a CSS validator, it hopefully would have told me. It probably would. This is the moment of truth where I do something super embarrassing, nothing works. Because remember, at the beginning, I questioned myself. Should I put content main outside of the media query? No. But I read in the book that the class content is not supposed to be in main. It's supposed to be in the body. And that is why we use that descendant selector. It was, I remember, I'm going to change this also for both pages, activities. All right, so remember this was a descendant selector dot content. So it's a class for where contained, okay. So it's a descendant selector. So it's selecting main from inside whatever element contained the content. All right, so finally I realized this is the moment where I shrink down to mobile design, and it still has the 3 columns. We don't want 3 columns on mobile design. It looks horrible. Okay, so since it's sitting outside, it like does everything for the at 600, but once it gets past it, it goes back to that mobile first design. So I have to take all that, everything I just did, and of course, cut and paste it into my actual media query. I'll just move the closing curly braces down here. Boom, media query, done. Now check it out. Okay, back to 1 column. There we go. I don't really like this. I would change the media query a little bit. Those columns are a little thin for me, but that's okay. This is great. Next, we are going to configure the large display, which is basically taking everything back to our original design, but we're going to use a grid instead of just forced elements like we learned.